And good. Welcome to this week's edition of Reigns on the Cardinals podcast. Rob Reigns, Mike Reigns here on STLSportsPage.com. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Hopefully, everybody's been enjoying these weekly podcasts. Mike and I decided to start these after we just had kind of frequent conversations over the phone. Sometimes during the ball game, I think, Mike, sometimes we ought to just record our conversations while the game's going on and let that go instead of having a formal show.
We should, yes. We are quite opinionated on certain things, yes.
Probably something that we probably wouldn't want to put on the air sometimes. But anyway, thanks to all of our sponsors, Archwell Health Podcast. Hope you enjoy your Health Matters podcast. We'll be back with another edition of that soon here later in the month. Rawlings Experience. If you haven't been out to Westport to check out the new museum and gift shop out at Rawlings, you need to do that. As well, of course, is AAA Travel of Missouri. And then, of course, our main title sponsor been with us from the beginning, Drury Hotels. Anytime you've got a trip coming up anywhere, the Drury Hotels has a hotel. I think you will want to stay there. We were just at the hotel in Horn Lake, Mississippi, just outside of Memphis last week when we were down there. Had a great time. Of course, you can use the code word sports and get a great discount on any Drury Hotel room, any hotel that they have. So hopefully everybody will check that out and take advantage of that as we get into the summer travel months. But speaking specifically of the Cardinals and travel, Mike, they're coming off the 3-4 road trip. They, I guess, kind of considering how it started, but the day off here on Thursday before getting back to games at Busch Stadium, considering how it started, the 3 losses in Milwaukee, getting outscored 18-3 in the first 2 games, probably could have been a worse road trip than 3-4.
Absolutely. And I think the one bright spot you look at is, if you think about it as a Cardinals fan, you've had some tough times watching this team so far. Be glad you're not an Angels fan. That team is going to have some troubles this year. I was Googling half the guys that are playing on their team because I never heard of them, don't know where they came from.
I would not want to be Ron Washington. Yeah, he's got a tough go there. He finally gets a chance to manage after, of course, he had the shot at Texas and did a good job, and coaching a long time with the Atlanta Braves, but gets another shot to manage and has to deal with all the injuries that they have. I think it's 14 guys on the injury list. So yeah, I think Cardinal fans should realize that it could be worse.
It definitely could be worse for sure. But it was nice to see the 2 wins in LA after not playing so hot in Milwaukee.
And the 2 comeback wins. I think, you come back from the early deficit in Milwaukee, come back from the early deficit in LA. So I think those are all encouraging signs. I think the offense getting, double-digit hits in 4 consecutive games is an encouraging sign. But unfortunately, there also are still some signs of trouble that we have to talk about because this team is not still clicking on all cylinders and have a lot of issues. And I think the biggest issue that offensively, and it's been a problem since day one of the regular season, and it's one of those kind of statistics you can't really put a handle on it. And that's their performance with runners in scoring position because it's just been dreadful. I remember, I think it was 2011. It was one of those years that the team just got, on fire. They hit like 300 or something with runners in scoring position. And everybody kind of tried to figure out why. And you can't. There's no real explanation about why you can do well in those situations or you don't do well. But right now, unfortunately, and of course for the whole season, Cardinals not doing well. 1 of 10 again on Wednesday night in the loss to the Angels. On the road trip, a combined 11 hits in 73 at-bats with runners in scoring position. That's a 151 average.
And how many times do they get the bases loaded with no outs or 1 out, and we can't move the runners around? All you need to do is hit a fly ball or something. And, the question that I wonder is, are we trying to advance the runners? Are we thinking about the option of dropping down bunts with runners in scoring position or different options just to move them over? Or are we focused too much on the home run aspect and trying to go for the big splash all at once? And that's a question none of us will be able to answer without, some insight from the coaching staff, but certainly something that's hard to watch for sure.
Well, you could be like the Angels and try to do a squeeze play, but then have the guy miss the ball and the runners tagged out at the plate. So you don't want that either.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, but here's the numbers for the season. Now, 191 average with runners on either second or third, 7 home runs in 351 combined at bats with runners on either second or third. I mean, that's just dreadful numbers. There's only 1 team in the National League that's below 234, which is 43 points above what the Cardinals average is, and that's the Pirates. Only 1 other team in the National League has worse than a 234 batting average with runners in scoring position.
The frustrating thing about watching some of this team is you don't really feel like the confidence is there when watching them to think that they're going to come through, right? And I know that sounds very negative to say, but when they get up there with the bases loaded and nobody out, you're just kind of waiting for the double play because it seems to be the way that it happens, right? And so hopefully we can start to turn that around. But to me, as we talk about, as you just mentioned, the home run numbers, the team is starting to hit more home runs, which is nice, but they're doing it with nobody on base.
Right.
As we had just talked about earlier, Since last Monday, May 6th, they home run. 8 of those 9 were solo home runs.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not good enough.
2 of them were by Goldschmidt, which is nice to see him starting to trend in the right direction, which is what we've been talking about for a while. And 2 of them were by Newtbar, which is nice to see that, the power coming from there too. And 1 by Gorman. So that's good for the guys that need to pick it up. But the problem is nobody's getting on base in front of them to make it matter.
Right. Here's the raw numbers for the season. There's only 3 guys that, if you take like the 10 basic Cardinal players who will be in the lineup on a regular basis, not the guys who come up and down, not Walker or Scott or guys who are already back in Memphis, but there's only 3 players with a higher than 217 batting average with runners in scoring position. Arenado's at 275, Burleson 258, Herrera at 269. Those are the 3 guys. Then you got the bad, Donovan 212, Newtbar 217, Goldschmidt 200, Wynn 177, Carpenter 143, Gorman 086, and Ciani 056. Those aren't very good numbers.
Those are not good numbers, no. And I think the struggle is Ciani's having to play a lot more than we counted on him playing this year, right? And so I think that's someone that you're really hoping that Jordan Walker can get back here at some point, or we can fight through some of these injuries and hopefully get some of these guys back, so that I'm not saying that Ciani hasn't performed well. His defense has probably kept him in a lot of games, right?
Yeah, made some great plays.
Made some great plays to highlight that. But I think the fact that you're counting on him a little bit more offensively than you were expecting to. But Gorman and Goldschmidt are the 2 that really need to figure out a way to come through.
And I think part of the problem too, and we saw him finally in one of the games in Los Angeles, put Mason Wynn at the leadoff spot. They've had a real problem figuring out the leadoff spot. I know that Donovan has sit there most of the time, and he's been okay, but he's not had a year that I think you kind of expected Brendan Donovan to have. And then they tried Carpenter there a couple of games, worked okay, but they've got to get guys on base out of that leadoff spot who can generate traffic for the guys coming up in the middle of the order.
And it answers the problem that we just talked about before, too many solo home runs, right? Because if you can find a way to get guys on base, and I really like having Donovan in that second spot, right? He's probably still leading your team in RBIs at this point. So having someone that can get on base in front of him is nice. And hopefully Mason can be that guy. I really think that he can. He's playing well. And hopefully he can find a way to lock it in. Seems like they've been starting him there with a lefty and Carpenter there with a righty on the mound. So maybe that combination works. But let's hope somebody starts to figure out that leadoff spot.
Well, yeah, last edition of the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast was taped right after Wilson Contreras broke his arm. We found out he'd be out until after the All-Star break. Everybody kind of obviously panicking a little bit because Contreras had been the best offensive player on the Cardinals to this point in the season. How are they going to replace him? Well, I think Herrera and Pedro Pages have done a fine job. Their average is over 300. They've got 5 RBIs combined in the 7 games that they played since Contreras got hurt. So I don't think that really has been a problem. Herrera did finally get a caught stealing on Wednesday night too. His opponents have been 22 for 22 against him, so that's one kind of flaw in his game. But offensively, I think the Cardinals have to be pleased with the production they've got so far from those 2 guys at the catcher position.
Yeah, definitely. And Pages really picked a great time to hit up that first hit down the line to score 3 and help that game out for sure. The question that I have when looking at both of them is offensively they've come through nice, but defensively it seems like the starting pitching this round through has given up a few more runs. So is that something on the way they're calling the game compared to how Wilson called the game, or what are we looking at there as things sort of shift and change this time through with the rotation?
Yeah, and once we talked about with the offense struggling, I think you put a lot of pressure on the rotation to kind of know that they're not going to have, if they give up, probably more than 4 or 5 runs, chances are they're not going to win that ball game, and not just the starters getting to win, but the team getting to win. So I think that's probably kind of contributed to that factor is because of the offense. But yeah, you're right. I think we have a misconception a little bit, and we're probably as guilty of it as anybody else, thinking about how great the rotation has been. And the fact that Gray, Gibson, and Wynn were all, I think, positive additions over the winter. But I think when you run the numbers, it's probably not been as good as maybe you think it's been. And I think it might start to be getting a little bit of an area of concern that they're going to have to deal with as well. Here's just what, we're going to go through some of the numbers, but just the raw number is this: the actual overall Cardinals starter rotation. The starters by themselves, a combination of everybody who started a game so far this season. 12-15 is the record, 4.72 ERA. And that 4.72 ERA actually ranks 25th in Major League Baseball at this point among starters' ERAs. Four of the five teams that are worse than you are the White Sox, the Rockies, the Marlins, and the Athletics. That's really not a group that you want to be associated with.
No, it's absolutely not a group that you want to be associated with, because some of those teams are having some really bad seasons, some really bad records. And yeah, the question would be, is the starting pitching certainly looked better to start with, and this last time through the rotation, it hasn't been as strong. I guess the one positive you could say is you look at these guys like Lance and Sonny, and they've given up, 3 or 4 runs in their first inning, but then still managed to go 5 or 6 innings and keep the game within reach. Obviously the offense isn't doing what it needs to come back from that deficit, but they're trying to give you everything they can to stay in the game. You could certainly tell that Lance did not have all of his stuff last night. His fastball was not working. And he tried to find a way to give you as many innings as you could when the bullpen was kind of thin.
Yeah, a couple of those hits off Lynn in the first inning were not, you're just kind of fluky hits. One hit off second base bag and one hits off his leg, or maybe that inning turns out differently. He'd only given up 2 runs in the first inning combined in his first 8 starts, but gives up 4 in that last game against the Angels. Kind of a problem on that trip. The Cardinals were outscored 10-0 in the first inning on that 7-game road trip. I think their combined batting average, I don't have that number in front of me, it was like 150 or something, and opponents hit like 350 or something in that first inning. So it's hard to play catch up, every night. I mean, we talked about the Cardinals having a couple of comeback wins, but it is really hard to do that every night. It's nice to be able to try to play with the lead sometimes, because we all know how effective the Cardinal bullpen has been if you can get them to the 7th inning with a lead.
Yeah, and the bullpen really has been a bright spot. I think we were a little worried with JoJo the other night, pitching so many pitches and giving up a little bit there. But the bullpen's going to have nights where they're going to give up runs, right? But I think the bigger question is, can we score to offset that difference? And right now, the offense isn't coming through when they need to.
Here's some more numbers on the different guys within the rotation. Gray has a 3.05 ERA, Gibson 3.67. Those are both, I think you'd be taking, if those were their numbers at the end of the year, I think you'd be okay with that. Wynn's at 4.17 after Wednesday night, so that you want that to come down a little bit. Everybody else is ERA who has started a game so far this season as a starter is above 6. Gray, Gibson, and Lynn have a combined 8-6 record as starters. Everybody else, 4 wins combined in 19 starts. So if you take those 3 guys and say, okay, we're going to take what they've given us to this point and be happy with that, then you've got to find 2 guys elsewhere in that rotation to get the job done. Even including the bullpen, as good as they've been, the team ERA in May is 5.26. The starters ERA in May is 5.94. 3 wins combined in 13 starts, 13 games.
And the one guy that I'm going to single out of that group is Kyle Gibson. You look at Kyle Gibson's last 5 starts, his ERA is 2.1. So Kyle has found a way after the one blow up at the beginning of the season and, to really settle it down. It's Lynn and Sonny that really need to find a way to limit those runs in the first inning, and obviously Sonny gave up the 1 3-run home run, but to me, Kyle's been the bright spot in here, and he was probably the guy that was kind of the afterthought of like, oh, let's just add him because we need a starter. But he's really been the highlight of this rotation so far in my mind.
And really, you go on 6 innings, and every one of his starts or more, except for the last one where he only went 5. But all saying, and I guess kind of the tone of this thing has been a little bit negative to this point of this edition of Reigns on the Cardinals podcast. But here's the bottom line, and if you want to look at it, the overall record 18-25, tied for last in the National League Central with the Reds, who have just been awful of late. But 2.5 games out of a wild card spot as we sit here on May 15th, May 16th.
I think when you look at it from a negative standpoint, it's because a lot of these games have been kind of tough to watch because you feel like they've been in all of them and they find a way to either not get the hit with runners in scoring position or get down early, and you just kind of get deflated watching this team when you start with, right? So the hope is that they can find some offense and start to have some fun playing the game. It just seems like everybody's too high strung and a little bit too stressed out right now to really relax and just play the game the way that they know how to.
And I guess the other good news is they're almost done with California now for the season. 3 trips to the West Coast already here in the first 6 weeks of the season, but now they don't go back to California until the last 3 days of the regular season. They'll end the season at San Francisco. So every game that they have, I guess the 3 games on that trip before the San Francisco game or the Colorado trip. So every other game between now and the last week of the season will either be in the Eastern or the Central time zone. So that's going to help their viewing audience. You don't have to stay up quite so late to watch some of those ball games. So that'll be it'll be interesting. I guess we talked about this before, how weird the schedule has been. The fact that they have only played the Brewers as the only nationally central team that they have played. And I heard them mentioning on the Valley's broadcast that the Angels haven't even played a single team from their own division, the American League West, yet. So it's not just the Cardinals that have kind of an odd schedule.
The schedule's very weird for sure. And that was the stat I was just going to say, is the fact that they haven't played a division opponent outside Milwaukee is probably a good thing when this team is playing kind of the way that they are, right? So if you can find a way to pick it up and beat the games, beat the teams in your division. Obviously, we didn't do that against Milwaukee, but we still have a few more games against them. But we certainly got the other teams that we can and should beat. So you find a way to do that, you're not out of this by any means,
While the Cardinals were in Milwaukee, we got in the car and drove down to Memphis for the weekend, as we mentioned, staying at the Drury Hotel in Horn Lake, Mississippi. It's about 15 minutes from the ballpark. So if you're going down that way, I encourage you to do that. But had a chance to catch up with Jordan Walker, Victor Scott II, kind of the first time that we talked to them since they got sent down, and kind of check in on how they're doing. And interestingly, it kind of turned into a story, and it's also on STLSportsPage.com. Hopefully you got a chance to read it, about how there's a couple of guys, Matt Carpenter being one, who was still there when we were down there, got a chance to chat with him. And then Ryan Ludwig, a former Cardinal, who's now one of the roving hitting instructors in the minor leagues. And both of them commented on the fact that not specifically connected to Walker and Scott, but just how the trend in baseball now is to rush young hitters to the major leagues, and that they're really having a hard time making that adjustments. And the story kind of details some of the reasons why and the difference between those two guys and everybody who's trying to come up from AAA to the big leagues. And Carpenter specifically said he thinks the gap now between AAA and the major leagues in hitting is the greatest that it's ever been. So it's really a challenge and difficult assignment for those guys to adjust after they hit well in AAA, to try to figure out how to do that at the big league level. And I know Walker had a decent amount of success at the end of last season after he'd been playing basically all year at the major league level. So but then got off to such a slow start this year. But he's encouraged by how he's playing. We got some comments from him and Ben Johnson, the manager of the Memphis Ball Club, in the story. And I think he had a 9-game hitting streak that got snapped in the second game of a doubleheader on Tuesday when Memphis almost got no hit. But I would think of the two, you're going to see Walker back in St. Louis sooner rather than later, because I think he still hasn't not hit a home run down there, but is hitting for above a 300 average and hitting the ball harder on a more consistent basis. And the Cardinals basically need him in this lineup.
They really do need him in this lineup for sure. And I think the biggest challenge that people don't understand coming from the AAA to the big leagues is AAA pitchers have probably 2, maybe 3 really good pitches. You get up here to the big leagues and it's 4 and 5. And it's kind of the reverse aspect of when a pitcher gets behind in AAA, he's going to go to what his best pitch is to throw a strike. And that's typically going to be his fastball, maybe a cutter. And you get up here in the big leagues and it's the reverse of that. When you get behind an account, all of a sudden you're going to see a pitcher go to the curveball or go to more off-speed stuff, and you're not expecting that. And so when guys get rushed through and try to come up, it takes them a while to kind of figure out that the game in the big league level, the pitching aspect is a little bit backwards from where it is in AAA. And I'm going to forget the guy's name, but there's the one guy from the Angels that came up. He was drafted, and then 40 days later was in the big leagues.
Yeah. No, Schwano, it's the first baseman. Yeah, I can't think of his name.
Yeah,
and Nito came up really quick too. That's just what they've done with them.
That's the thing, is we're not the only team that's doing it, right? You're seeing it everywhere across the board, and it just takes guys a while to get the hang of it up here.
Well, and the guy generally regarded as the top prospect in baseball now, Jackson Holliday, Matt Holliday's son, he gets called up by the Orioles, goes 2 for 34. We saw him playing for Norfolk last weekend when we were in Memphis. So it's not just the Cardinals who are doing this. It's kind of a trend throughout all of baseball. And there are a lot, as I said, there's a lot of reasons for it. So we encourage you. It's a fairly long story. We encourage you, if you're interested, to read that. I think you'll get some more information and maybe kind of be something that you hadn't thought about before. The other story that we did from down there looked at, there are 3 current guys who have made their major league debut so far this season for the Cardinals, and Victor Scott II, Chris Roycroft, and Pedro Pajes, but I think there are 4 other guys down there that we detailed have a shot at coming up here some point this year. I think the other guys could do it too, but Sam Roberse, as we've mentioned before on this podcast, has pitched very well. You got Thomas DeJacy, the young infielder that got from Texas in the trade, who's played well down in Memphis. And then you got Cesar Prieto, who's a guy that came over from Baltimore in the Flaherty trade last year, who's really probably been one of the better players at Memphis and had a really good spring training too. So if the Cardinals have a need for an infielder sometime soon, I wouldn't be surprised if he's the guy that gets the call. A little bit older too, 25 years old. He's a native of Cuba. And then the other guy that we were kind of rooting for, we paid attention to his story from the beginning here on STLSportsPage.com, is Ryan Ludus, the Washington U grad, who's trying to become, follow Al Maxfield's footsteps and get to the Cardinals after signing as a non-drafted free agent out of WashU. He's played much better, pitched much better this season. We saw him get the save in one of the games that we were at down in Memphis. So what Ben Johnson talked about, how he's pitching with much more confidence this year than he was a year ago, and that's encouraging to see. Always like to see those kids do well.
I was just saying, that's really the thing too. It's the confidence sometimes that it takes these kids to build, and once they start playing well, all of a sudden it can spiral and become they're playing well for a long time, because once they have the confidence to know, like, hey, I can throw this pitch to get this guy out, or I know I can use this pitch to do whatever. That really goes a long way once they get a little bit of luck falling their way to build their confidence.
One other minor league note we want to mention before we move on to talk about the homestand coming up for the Cardinals. Quinn Matthews was a kid the Cardinals drafted in the 4th round last July, out of Stanford. Didn't pitch last season, as Cardinals always kind of take it slow with those guys who pitched a lot in college, but he's pitched terrific so far this season. Started the year at Palm Beach. They just moved him up to Peoria, so it's going to be interesting to see how he makes that adjustment. He's a guy to watch that could move quickly as, again, a college pitcher that's got that level of experience pitching in the Pac-10. So it'll be interesting to see once he gets started in the rotation at Peoria how he does and how long he's there before they try to keep moving him up through the system. All right, so shifting to the Cardinals' upcoming homestand after the day off on Thursday, 9 games over a 10-day span, 3 against Boston, 3 against Baltimore, and our first look at the Cubs over Memorial Day weekend. Here's the challenge for the Cardinals going into this series. Those 3 teams, you add up their records, they're 20 games over 500. So this is not going to be an easy homestand, starting with the 3 games against the Red Sox. Kyle Gibson does get the start on Friday night in that opener.
For sure. We get to see our old friend Tyler O'Neill again with the Red Sox, who's been playing great. And everybody's been, looking back and thinking, why didn't he do this when he was here? Well, one, he couldn't stay healthy when he was here.
That's the biggest problem, yeah.
The Red Sox are playing well, but they're also there's some holes in that lineup too. So I think the Cardinals can really find a way to get it done against them. Yes, their record is better than ours by quite a bit, but there's some strikeouts to be had in that lineup. There's some holes to be had in that lineup. So I think these are 3 games that could help them build some confidence for the rest of the series if they find a way to get it done.
I think Boston leads the American League in team ERA, so the challenge again with the Cardinal offense is can they get some hits and string those hits together. Tanner Houck, Mizzou grad, will be one of the Red Sox. He's one of the Red Sox starters. So I haven't seen the Red Sox rotation yet, so I'm not sure if he's going to be starting one of these 3 games or not. Of course, one game on that homestand that we have to highlight, and that's going to be the Friday, May 24th game against the Cubs, because it's not important for what happens on the field. It's going to be important for what happens in the broadcast booth. There they are, Joe Buck, Chip Caray. Buck and Caray will be together again, a special version. Ever since Chip got the job in St. Louis, they kind of talked about doing this, and Joe was interested, and they finally got a game that's going to work on that Friday night game here at Busch, May 24th. Be Joe Buck and Chip Caray together on the Bowie Sports Midwest call. That'll be a lot of fun.
It'll be a lot of fun. It's a very neat story for sure, and there'll be a lot of people looking down on that game, watching the 2 of them together too.
Including Harry and Jack. Yeah. So, of course, Harry is Chip's grandfather, and Jack, of course, Joe's son. So that will be a lot of fun. So it'll be an important homestand. I mean, this is a tough stretch for the Cardinals, and we'll know kind of a lot more about how maybe the direction this season is going to go by Memorial Day when we see how they fare on this homestand.
This is a very important homestand. Yes, absolutely. If they can find a way to, be on the positive side of this series, would be do a lot of great things for this team and for their confidence moving forward.
Well, we'll be watching. We'll have it all covered for you elsewhere on STLSportsPage.com. Of course, no paywall on our site. Thanks to our great sponsors, Archwell Health, Rawlings Experience, AAA Travel Missouri, and our other sponsors as well, of course, Drury Hotels and all of their sponsors. Great sponsorship. So appreciate them making all of our content free to you here on the site. If you're not signed up for our newsletter, be sure to do that. You'll see the newsletter link on STLSportsPage.com. or you can just send us an email at stlsportspage@gmail.com, and we'll get you signed up for the newsletter to how we have all our contests and some other information that sometimes doesn't appear in other places on the site. So it'll be a fun stretch of golf ball games here we'll be covering for you. And we thank you for paying attention to our podcast as well as reading all of our other stories here on stlsportspage.com. Mike, thanks for the visit. We appreciate it.
Yeah, let's hope it's positive news when we come back next week.
And thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Reins on the Cardinals podcast here on stlsportspage.com.